Picture this. It's 1911 and Elizabeth Kenny is back in town after a 4-year absence. She doesn't return empty-handed. She has a plan and is dressed in a nurse's uniform. She advertises her services in the local newspaper as a medical and surgical nurse. Her uniform is immaculate. There's just one catch. She's not actually been to nursing school. She's been gone for long enough to train as a nurse, but no one has ever been able to discover any proof of her undertaking any form of nursing training. Did it matter? Evidently not. In a world where qualifications were hard to check and medical services in the bush were scarce, appearance and confidence carried a lot of weight. The main thing was, she looked the part. The townsfolk welcomed the services of Nurse Kenny. Not even Dr. MacDonald, her old acquaintance in Toowoomba, had suspicions about her nursing qualifications. There was only one chink in her armour. She didn't have a hospital badge that showed where she had trained. Nurses wore their hospital badge with pride, a tradition that continues in Australia today. Within a year of returning to Nobby, Kenny had opened a small cottage hospital in nearby Clifton, calling it St Canis Private Hospital. The first thing she did was to have a telephone installed. Good move. She then advertised her services as a certificated medical, surgical and midwifery nurse. Bad move. Business was brisk at St Canis. She delivered babies. She treated farmers who'd been mangled by machinery. She looked after the elderly as they recovered from illnesses. She worked alongside hospital-trained nurses and university-trained doctors. But no one appears to have suspected she was masquerading as a trained nurse. As is often said, all good things must come to an end. For nearly 4 years, Kenny prospered as the proprietor of St Canis, but the long arm of the law was reaching towards her. New laws in Queensland meant only doctors or registered nurses could run private hospitals. Elizabeth wasn't registered or even qualified, so she knew that if anyone pushed the issue, her business and her reputation would collapse overnight. She needed a way out, and as luck would have it, her problem was resolved by even more calamitous events. As she admitted in her memoir, the world cataclysm of 1914 closed that chapter of my life. When Great Britain declared war on Germany in August 1914, Australians came to the defence of the mother country with patriotic zeal. At home, business carried on as usual at St Canis, even though the hospital faced the threat of being closed by the authorities. In April 1915, the young nation faced a baptism of fire at the infamous Battle of Gallipoli. Then, out of the blue, Kenny closed the hospital, sold its contents, and announced she had been accepted for military service. Just like that. The war offered Kenny 2 things: an escape from being unmasked as a fraud, and an opportunity for yet another reinvention. But there was a problem. She was too old and lacked the qualifications to join the Army nursing service. Okay, 2 problems. Most people would have given up right there. Not Kenny. She scraped together nearly a year's wages and brought a one-way ticket to England aboard the RMS Medina. Picture this. She boards the ship wearing a nurse's uniform, with a letter of recommendation from Dr. MacDonald tucked in her bag. No guarantee of work, no backup plan, just sheer nerve. Or was it delusion? And yet, somehow it worked. She found employment as a civilian nurse aboard a transport ship, requisitioned by the Australian Army to bring wounded troops back to Australia. It gets even better. Once she's back in Australia, she somehow manages to be appointed as a staff nurse to the Australian Army Nursing Service. Officially, it was impossible, but as history has shown, all things are possible in times of war. Fortune favours the bold, and so it did for Elizabeth Kenny. On the 16th of July 1916, Staff Nurse Kenny boarded the HMAT Themistocles, bound for England. It was the first of 6 return trips she would make between England and Australia on a troop transport ship. These were no luxury liners. The voyages were long, the work gruelling, and the ships were crowded with hundreds of sick and injured soldiers. Influenza and meningitis spread through the cramped decks. Kenny coped with it all. In 1917, she was promoted to the rank of Sister. For the rest of her life, that was her name and her identity. Sister Kenny. The war gave Kenny more than a new name. It gave her freedom. Aboard ship, she worked closely with women like herself, caregivers, risk-takers, nonconformists, sharing cabins and duties, and sometimes fearing for their lives. Relationships formed quickly in the pressure cooker of wartime. Some were so intense that historians still wonder whether these wartime relationships between nurses involved physical intimacy. Whether or not romance was involved, one thing is clear. Kenny thrived in this world of close bonds and shared purpose. She had found her people. She had found herself. Kenny's war experience also exposed her to something that would change her future. She observed the latest rehabilitation techniques in action while stationed in the Australian Auxiliary Hospitals in England. Soldiers with shattered bodies weren't just left to waste away in hospital beds. They were massaged, they were exercised, their muscles were retrained. Restoration of movement and function was the goal. That idea stuck. Years later, it would become the core of her treatment for polio. By the end of the war, Elizabeth Kenny was no longer the restless girl from the Australian bush. She was Sister Kenny, a woman who had remade herself and who wasn't about to step quietly back into obscurity.